Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining my session. Get down with your bad self, doing things you love poorly to live your life well. Let's kick it off by saying that this is a story without an ending, and it's actually not much of a story yet. It's somewhere in the middle ground between a failed passion project and potentially my life's calling. Either way, I've grown super attached to the arc of the story and, of course, the protagonist, and you'll see why in a second. So a few things to know before diving in is that even though I'll talk about it a lot in the next few minutes, the story is not actually about running or really any other activity. It's framed in the context of a documentary about running that I've kind of been working on, but by no means do you have to identify as a runner in order to join this conversation with me, which is kind of the fun part. So, like I said, it is running involved, and it's also most definitely not about doing something epic or impressive for the sake of earning street cred and being outdoorsy or anything like that. It's, as a matter of fact, the term adventure film is something that I put in major sarcastic quotes because I find it disingenuous. So it's also, like I said, not entirely about film or creative pursuits in any way. It's about buckling into a passion and a hobby or a passion project and seeing it through, even though there are times where you want to put it down. So what it is about is it's about wading out of my comfort zone. It's about coming to realize that day-to-day goings-on of life are more important than any one goal I ever could have set for myself. And this is about visually and verbally sharing experiences and finding out how, if at all, my individual strong suits of communication can offer the ability to look one step deeper into the perspective that the things I love can provide. This is about taking your hobby and turning it around so many times in your hands that it becomes unfamiliar to yourself, and then refamiliarizing yourself with it and getting really excited about that. It's about reevaluating something that you've done a million times and molding it into something that feels unfamiliar, and it'll inevitably take you out of your comfort zone. So I say all of these sort of in the first person about what I've learned, but I would love to hear what y'all think and if you agree and what you've done that's sort of similar. The more you stare at something, the stranger it becomes sometimes, even though you get more and more familiar with it. So in other words, this is a little story about how I got down with my bad self and did things that I love that I've done a million times and learned to do them poorly and sort of reevaluate them. So who's the cast in this play? It's kind of funny how it starts. So it actually kind of starts with the dog, which has now become dogs. And it's not too much of a stretch to say that this started with Gunner, the first dog that I had rescued. I was a college kid in Chicago, and I had never run for fun. I had never tried to. I was never a runner. And then junior year of college, it was a bloody cold winter in Chicago, and the only way to keep this dog from bouncing off the walls was to take him for runs. And he was tireless, so I had really no other choice than to learn to enjoy running. And the second character is Mo. And a friend introduced me to Mo in Montana. And on that day, Gunner, the dog from the previous slide, who was kind of rough and tumble and had never really taken to any other people, he jumped right up onto her lap. And fast forwarding quite a bit, Mo and I have been inseparable ever since. So that's how the dog got me running, and the dog led me to Mo. And this video idea, when I had the video idea, Mo and I were already running a little bit because Gunner needed it still, and we had learned to enjoy it. And somewhere in there, we got a second dog who needed to run. And I was doing a little bit of freelance work with video and was kind of thinking about how there would be a good way to create pretty enough video while we were running, and it was a technical challenge, so I'll get into that in a second. So the last character is me. So I'm behind the camera, and initially I thought that I would just be a silent player in this video project that kind of turned out to be a documentary. And I think I'll talk about that more in a second, the documentary idea. And it's just not possible to remain a silent player when you're the only other person that's out on the trail or out with the other characters. So the initial thought process behind the plot of this documentary was to rehash a little bit. Back when I adopted Gunner, I was in my early 20s, and I didn't really know the first thing about running, but I started to enjoy it as an activity. And at one point, I even thought to myself when I was in my early 20s that I should run 30 miles on my 30th birthday. And I didn't know how to get there, but it seemed like something fun to do when I got old, which 30 seemed old. So I've had that idea in my mind since then, and that was a long time ago. But spoiler alert, my 30th birthday came and went, and that 30-mile run did not happen for a lot of reasons. And the initial thought process was also that I was already bringing my gear everywhere. I liked photography and videography, and it was a method of communication that I liked to lean on. And I liked the technical side of trying to figure out how to carry cameras that would create a nice enough image that you could create a documentary that people would want to watch, that would be light enough to carry and be a one-man crew. At the time, I was also taking on occasional freelance clients, but after a couple years of getting really annoyed with clients, and I never felt like I was really creating something that I was proud of in freelance work, I just decided to step away from it and take this on instead. And at one point, a few years before Mo and I moved to Salt Lake, we were living in Boston, and a friend asked if I would run an event with him, and he was living in Vermont, and we agreed to do it as a way to keep in touch with each other. And then we planned to meet up the following fall for the event. And during the whole process of training, the most fun part was the simplicity of going out by myself for a few hours on Saturday mornings and covering a good bit of ground on my own 2 feet. And I was always surprised by the mental clarity that those hours on my feet provided. And I really wanted to encourage Mo to try this out too, because I wanted her to see some of this clarity as well and enjoy some of that. So this was the initial plan for a running movie, was to illustrate the moments of clarity that Mo would experience while we learned to run long distances together. It was never about going a certain distance. The mental clarity I was able to achieve just some good days, some bad days, and it could be 20 minutes, it could be a lot longer. So since we're a technical crowd, let's take a quick aside and get technical with some of the tools that I found that allow for long battery life, weather and dust proof, overall durability, and are also light enough for days that can end up lasting 18 hours long of just carrying camera stuff. The requirement was that it was light, strong, and created a high enough quality image. So here's what I landed on using. Sony mirrorless DSLR. I had an old Canon that I sold, and this Sony a7S, it's the first version. It's on its last leg after a couple years of beating up on it. And I'm just shooting at 1080, 24 frames per second. I don't actually love this camera or the image that it produces, but it was the best option given how small their lenses were, how light the frame, the body was at the time. And it had reliable image and autofocus, which I had to utilize while it was on the gimbal, and we'll get there. The second piece of equipment was the Rode VideoMic Pro Plus, and that with that hairy Fun fact, that's actually called a dead cat. That's on the microphone. And every time we take it out, the dogs always think it's a toy for them. So that gives me relatively good audio from the camera. And for the first while, I tried to, oh, I have these out of order. So I'll go forward 2. For the first few months, I tried to make the audio work with just that Rode Shotgun mic with the gimbal attached, with that Rode mic attached to the gimbal, but it wasn't giving me good enough audio of people speaking. It was really only catching the squeaking of the gimbal and me huffing and puffing. So I bought a Zoom F1 recorder, which records to a lavalier microphone that I can clip to Mo, usually to a backpack strap. And this thing has been awesome. When you turn it on, the battery lasts over 60 hours just on a couple AAA batteries, which you can carry more of. And it has over 50 hours of recording time on a micro SD card. And so you just turn it on at the beginning of the day and turn it off at the end of the day. And then it's a nightmare to sync up all the audio, but you have good audio. Then the camera sits atop I went with a Pilot Fly gimbal. That's the brand name, Pilot Fly H2. The only reason I did that is because I knew I needed one hand to carry the camera. And this one has a 4th axis stabilizer, which is that middle thing I put the yellow flourishes around there. So that's just a spring that eats up the initial bumps of taking steps. And then the rest of the gimbal, the electronic part, can take care of stabilizing the rest. And then, of course, a whole backpack full of goodies, which is extra batteries, memory cards, filters for the lens cleaning stuff. And usually a whole day worth of shooting, even if it is 18 hours or so, will only take 2, 3, maybe 4 batteries, depending on the temperature. All right, so moving on from camera, take a drink. The first mental hurdle that I encountered after I had all the equipment working out well is realizing that this movie might not be interesting to watch because I was really only capturing one type of shot of Mo, and humans have a pretty short attention span, and we like to see other images in a movie other than the long follow shot of somebody running, you know, except for movies like 1917 or something like that, where you can do a long shot. And so I didn't have a crew with me. It was just me and one camera, and I wasn't always taking time to shoot B-roll, which is what the extra images in a movie are called. And I was also simultaneously training for the run with Mo while I was trying to shoot this movie. So I don't actually have an answer to this problem yet, but I think that there are ways to edit around this issue. And especially as Mo develops more as a person and a character, we'll capture more interviews, and the running will just become another character itself in the story. But it did get me thinking about audience expectations in a movie, though, which led me to, it kind of doesn't matter. I was thinking, what does a worthwhile story look like? Will audiences find this project visually engaging enough to watch if there aren't sweeping drone shots or enlightening time lapses or planet Earth worthy nature shots? We're so used to watching movies with massive budgets. Will people be interested in what this ends up being? Ultimately, I realized that the power of a story doesn't lie in how many people watch it. The power of a story lies in the fact that it exists. So things got difficult after a bit of time of shooting. So I'm going to read from my script here, and this will breeze over some stuff, but this is kind of the crux of everything for us. During the fall of our first year of running, Mo's stepmom, Gwen, fell ill from a bit of a freak allergic reaction to ibuprofen that sent her into liver failure. And so we'd spend the next 8 months back and forth between the Four Corners area of Colorado and Salt Lake, helping however we could while fully expecting Gwen to make a full recovery. Unfortunately, Mo and her dad lost Gwen in June, and any running plans we had just felt so small that we didn't even hold ourselves to them. So loving on Mo's dad and Mo and ourselves all together became our focus. So we would shoot a little video here and there, but we'd no longer schedule anything for ourselves. So paraphrasing what Ferris Bueller famously said, life started moving pretty fast after those months of losing Gwen. We'd go out a little bit for trail runs, but we're ultimately focused on sort of the nature therapy aspect of instead of training. And this is seriously breezing over things, but shortly after getting back into the swing of things after losing Gwen, Mo got some weird news from a routine doctor's appointment about precancerous tissue that needed to be removed. So we again buckled down and focused on the surgery and the recovery. And that surgery led to exploring other options, led to a colonoscopy and some major diet changes. And then just before COVID really took a hold of everything, Mo's grandmother passed away after an incredible 5-year fight with Alzheimer's. So just about every time we've gotten back into the swing of things, it seems like life has thrown something weird at us. So we realized that life is more important than art. And the reason I even say all of this is for a few reasons. Long before Gwen fell ill, I was personally battling with the idea that Mo's story wasn't mine to tell, that there's a lot more to Mo's story than she carries in her day-to-day life. And I didn't want to ask her to divulge any of that without her wanting to talk about it. And since we're life partners as well, I felt I had unfair access to who Mo was as a person, and I never wanted to exploit that access in order to tell a story. That was my idea. What's more is that I wasn't personally convinced that documentaries were even a worthwhile pursuit as an art form or as a method of communication, because although my background is in video production, that was narrative, and I never really felt that documentaries could get outside of being a narrative. I only ever really saw the perspective of the editors and the camera operators when watching documentaries, so I didn't really know how valid documentaries were. So here we are, two people feeling railroaded by the last few years, mourning lost loved ones, coming to understand the fragility of health and what a privilege it is to have time, to have the means and the ability to run as well as to tell stories. And it was also about this time that we realized the most important thing, that the story isn't about running at all. The story is about life. All of our lives have an arc. All of our lives have hurdles and hiccups. And initially I just set out to make a fun movie about the clarity that running provides. And I thought it would just be a short process captured over a few months or maybe a year. And this slowly but surely and quick all the same became very much not about running at all. It became about life and how it unfolds around us every day. And we came to think of it, I forgot to change the slide, but they're just short ones. And we came to think of it as an odyssey, not an epic. So this story is an odyssey, and chapters of it are a comedy, chapters of it are a tragedy, and that exactly mirrors what life is. The most important story wasn't ever about running a distance or a time. Who cares about that? Those stories are a dime a dozen about doing big things. What's important is that life happens. It isn't always pretty. It isn't always easy. But it's important that we acknowledge how we feel and how we care about the other people who are near us. We have the opportunity to slowly capture, to have had the opportunity to slowly capture life's changes while doing an activity that makes us happy and challenges us. It's been really cool to experience. And maybe above all, normalizing and talking about the difficulties that we experience has been such an excellent experience. In my opinion, we need more stories like this, and none of us are ever alone in feeling trampled by life. So let's talk with each other about and through these stories. One of the takeaways that I have personally is to allow yourself the opportunity to nerd out on the details of your hobbies, to think about them, to overthink them, to think about how they make you feel and how you can use them to share, and how you can use them to communicate with the people in your circles. And the more you think through the details of the hobbies or the passions that you have, even if you don't know where to start or what to do with them, just commit to continue learning and keep connecting with the people who are around you. And while we'll be really bad at those things for a while, we'll find ways to contribute. And nothing could be more important than sharing stories. Talk about how we're feeling and contributing in small but incremental ways. And that's my presentation. Does anybody have any questions or want to talk about gear or sharing stories?
Hey, Chris, I just want to say thank you because I feel like what you just shared was incredibly vulnerable. And I feel like you role modeled even as you were sharing the points that you were talking through. And I'm just having a lot of ahas. So thank you.
Very cool. Thank you. I'd love to talk through those ahas if you ever want to.
I would just echo that. That was a really beautiful presentation. Thanks for sharing that, Chris.
Cool. Thanks, Ken. I'm sorry I wasn't able to share video. I was afraid I would catch the internet on fire if I tried to share video, but I have some on my website and stuff that I can share.
Yeah, I was going to say, when do we get to watch the documentary?
Oh my goodness, I have hardly even started syncing up the audio from the 10-hour days of just recording. So I don't have an answer for that. I'm figuring out if it's better as one long video or if it's better as episodic stuff.
Well, let us know when you finish it eventually.
Awesome. Thank you. I will. Very cool. Thanks for coming, everybody. This has been something that I've been thinking about for a very long time. And it's great to share it. Great to just talk about it, talk through these things. Have an awesome day.